Do you find yourself confused about all of the storage types in Azure? We're going to help straighten that out for you today.
Hey guys, and welcome to the show. Today I have Ryan Berry. Wow.
I am back. Yeah, how's it going? I noticed you and I match now.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's the deal. And everybody, I apologize. There's been a little bit of a break here. We were out for the holidays, and I'm just getting things back rolling again. And so anyway, while I was out for Christmas, my son came to visit us, and he had a beard, and he convinced me to grow my beard back. So,
all right.
Yeah. So that's why. That's the deal.
Yeah.
And so
Might
it'll
start
stay,
as a little experiment and hasn't disappeared yet. So.
Yeah, it'll stay until I decide it's time.
Yeah.
But hey, man. So one of the things that people ask me about all the time is different Azure storage types. And so I figured that this would be a great chance for us to get together and just talk about the different types of storage. I know we have blob storage, we've got file storage, et cetera. So I thought that, it would be great to discuss that because we've got a lot of people that are new to Azure and maybe don't understand the differences.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I can take a little walk in the park and some of the storage services, and we have some talk about some of our core building block services for storage, and we also have some cool technologies that are built on top of that are really powerful when it comes to being able to synchronize file shares and having NFS as a service, and maybe we can briefly touch upon those at the end as well. But yeah, it should be a fun show.
Yeah, okay, that's awesome. And sorry if there's a little bit of a delay. I'm on 236,000 miles away.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible that you're able. I didn't think that we had anybody up on the moon in the past 50 years or so.
It's in beta.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, I love the background.
Yeah, thanks, man. Okay, well, let's go. Let's take a look.
Sure. All right. Let me go ahead and share a bit here. Let me just screen one. So I'll talk. I have just a couple of slides, and I can talk a bit about some of the capabilities that are inherently available in Azure that you could use yourself with applications maybe you're building, or that maybe some of the services that you deploy in Azure will use under the covers.
Okay.
And that's actually what this slide is highlighting. So maybe starting with the easier to comprehend aspects of storage in the black boxes here on the left is the components that are used in Azure Storage that are to be able to pacify the needs of virtual machines that or infrastructure as service that you have deployed in Azure. And there's two capabilities that we have within a storage account. So the way that you create one of these receptacles is just to literally go to the Azure portal and say, I want a new storage account. And a storage account can do any and all of these capabilities. I'll briefly touch upon. So disks, when you create a virtual machine, obviously it needs a disk to be able to store data and to be able to boot off of. So there's two different ways that disks are supported in Azure, and one is I call it a legacy way of supporting disks, and you might hear the word managed or unmanaged disks, and I can show in the portal. There's a little selector switch. Everything defaults to using the managed disks. If you use any automation to create VMs, it'll default to use managed disks. And storage accounts have been in existence in Azure since the 2008 timeframe when Azure launched, and the difference between managed and unmanaged disks are as follows. So when you created a VM, you would have had to say, I want the disks for this virtual machine to reside in this particular storage account. And that's all well and good, but what you could do is, basic storage account has a throughput limit of 20,000 IOPS, roughly, depending on the type of storage account that there is. So if you had, let's say you had 21 virtual machines that all had 1,000 IOP disks, well, now you've exceeded the overall throughput capacity the storage account can provide. So the managed disks with virtual machines, what that means is that we actually create storage accounts behind the scenes for you, so you don't even see them in your subscription. You know, in the past, you would have actually seen, you could have actually drilled into the storage account that your virtual machine was using, and you'd see the VHDs listed there. So that's abstracted away, and we do that purposefully to make it so, you know, the type of disk that you're creating and the IAP performance that you're requesting, that you will be guaranteed that that's actually the throughput you're going to get, and so you don't oversubscribe the storage account and by dropping in lots of virtual machines to the same storage account. So, but under the covers, just know that even though you can't see them, there are storage accounts that are behind the scenes to be able to support virtual machines. So, so even though in the unmanaged world you actually had to tell us what storage account to use, that concept still exists under the covers. So that's why it's on the slide. So second black box is, let's say you have a Windows file server and you want to be able to you know, to move that workload in Azure, but you don't want to pay the cost of having a VM running in Azure with disks attached to it to be able to support that workload. Or maybe you have, you know, a web application that's got a bunch of you know, the actual deployment of that web application sits on some sort of shared storage that you want to be able to access by a number of virtual machines. A number of different scenarios that having a common file share is important to be able to support. So Azure Files is literally a serverless SMB share.
Yeah.
And so there's
file share as a service.
That's exactly right. Yep. No servers under the covers. It's built on top of our Azure Storage services. So you know, behind you we have a veneer that sits in front of that to be able to implement the SMB protocol and also support CIFS, and hopefully at some point in the future might even support some other capabilities such as NFS. But today SMB and CIFS are the two that are supported. NFS is commonly requested out on the forums. So,
yeah. Do you know what version of SMB we speak?
But I think it's 3. So,
okay.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll also support 2, right? If somebody comes in with SMB 2.
Yeah, I think it might be 2.1. I have to double check that. That's a good question.
Yeah, probably 2 and 3.
Yeah. Okay, I knew 3 for sure. You know, I know, you know, that's, you know, in the SMB world that's kind of the preferred direction a lot of customers go.
And by the way, I'm just supposing that. I'm not sure that it's 2 3.
We should check that. So
yeah.
But 3 is what's
thinking. Lex said it was 2 and 3. So
exactly, yeah. It's but you know, 3 is kind of what's in the back of my mind on that. So
okay.
So those are 2 services or components of storage. One that is created dynamically without you seeing it. One that you have to purposefully do, that being Azure Files, and then the stuff on the right. So these are capabilities in Azure that the stuff on the left actually uses, specifically this orange box. Everything's kind of built on top of this concept called blobs, or binary large object storage. And it's really what Azure Storage Services is doing, is taking, you know, bits of data and dispersing it across, you know, massive amounts of disks in our data centers. So if you're building an application and that application needs to allow users to upload data, or maybe you need to, you know, the application is producing files and you want to be able to allow users to download data, you can actually programmatically store data in Blob storage accounts yourself using SDKs and a plethora of languages, you know, Java, course.net, you know, PHP. We have SDKs for just about everything under the sun. And we also have tools that you can use, I'll show shortly, to be able to manually move data into Blob storage. So Blob storage is really inexpensive and has some features that I'll talk about called tiering that allows you to move data from you know, readily available Blob storage accounts into you know, maybe infrequently accessed data into really inexpensive Blob storage, you know, that you know, up to and including a tier of storage that actually sits on tapes. So the time to first byte in that scenario is, you know, could be a while.
So would it be safe to say that it's not about the type of data or the type of file that you store in a Blob storage space? It's about the fact that you can get to it programmatically without going through the SMB interface.
Correct. Exactly. Yep. And in fact,
okay.
actually, the interface that we provide to be able to access data in Blob storage is a REST interface.
Okay.
So even if you're using the command line or using PowerShell or using the Storage Explorer I'll show in a moment, all of those facilities use the REST APIs under the covers, or if you built your own application, it would use the REST APIs. And in fact, actually our SDKs are just wrappers for the REST APIs to be able to access that data. And under the covers, when you have a disk, it's actually stored as a blob in a storage account. So I'll just briefly touch on these other two concepts, but we have this, NoSQL is kind of a, sounds like an oxymoron, but basically it's a schemaless store that lets you store. Think of it as like a massive spreadsheet.
Okay.
Rows and columns that you can shove data into. So it's and there's lots of different variations of this today. That support this sort of thing. Such as HD Insight and HBase and Snowflake. These are all NoSQL stores that are commonly used. So Azure Storage provides kind of a simple and inexpensive way to be able to facilitate that. And then finally, if you wanted to have an application to be able to decouple, like a web application, maybe an online ordering site, and you want to be, maybe during peak times of holiday season and so forth, that you've got these credit card transactions might be hitting a back end service, so you want to decouple those so you don't end up slowing down the users actually browsing your e-commerce site. And then one way that you can address that is by putting a queue in the middle. So Azure Storage provides an inexpensive and simple to use queue, and there's some other versions of that, like Service Bus has some additional capabilities, but these are just some core components that are built inside of Azure Storage, just by simply going to the Azure portal and saying new storage account. So there's two more things I was going to show. One is so in Blobs, like I said, everything at the end of the day, whether it's Azure Files, disks, or using Blobs natively, there's two different types of blobs that we support.
Okay.
And one is a block blob. So this would be, like you putting an image from a web application or putting a file into it that I want to let, maybe dynamically generating your tax return and allowing you to download it. So I want to, that would be a common scenario, that be a block blob, a small file that you put out there. And then we have well, I guess there's a third one too for append blobs that allows situation where you can have lots of writers that are appending data to different parts of a blob. But what disks actually use under the covers is what's called a page blob. So basically we, like I said, everything's under the covers stored as hit it as a blob in some way, shape, or form. And disks actually make use of this page blob, and this is actually is suitable for random reads and writes, which is exactly what a disk is supporting. As think about that, you create a terabyte disk, it creates a bunch of sparsely aligned blocks, and then as you're reading and writing data from the operating system reading and writing data, they're going to different locations, which equates to a different block in a storage account, and the REST interface of a storage account kind of facilitates where it physically resides. So it's kind of two different ways when you create a blob using the SDK. You have to indicate which type of blob you're creating, and that there's some optimizations done under the covers to support that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look here at the portal. This is a storage account. So you can actually create one of these just by simply going to, hitting new storage account. This is one I already created. And a storage account has a couple of different options that go along with it. One is a tier performance. So this is a standard tier performance or standard storage account. And there's also a replication option. So it has to do with are we replicating your data to another physical region? And by default, when you create a storage account, it's in what we call a locally redundant mode. Excuse me, just had a little tickle there.
Hey, that's okay. We're live,
yeah.
No edits.
All right. So, all right. So local redundant storage account. What that means is that Let's say you put a file out there. We store 3 copies of that data in a particular region.
And that's period, right? We do that
yep.
automatically.
We do that automatically. Yep.
Okay.
So because we run at such a massive scale, that insulates customers from transient issues or maybe a disk going out, or it also allows us to do maintenance on clusters of machines. And a storage cluster is like 20 or 30 racks, quite literally, in a data center. That's in a cluster that's used for storage. So your data spread around 3 of those, and you can select as an option to create what we call a geo-redundant storage account, in which we duplicate that and lazily or asynchronously copy that data to another region. Now you can't pick that region. So this is in South Central US, and if this were a geo-redundant storage account, the data would be copied to North Central US. So that's, we advertise where that data goes. So in here you can also, we have a explorer that you can actually use to be able to drill around or drill into and see what information is actually stored in the storage account. And when this loads up, it's taking a moment here. And the preview version in the portal, while that's loading, I'll just go ahead and first, for the sake of some time, I'll show you. This is actually a storage account or a tool rather called Storage Explorer. It lets you connect to an Azure subscription, and I can see all of the storage accounts that I have in my environment, and I can actually, so I'm looking at disks right now instead of storage accounts, so I can actually see the managed disks. Like I said earlier, that those disks actually reside in a storage account under the covers. And if I go to a storage account here, I can see the blobs that exist in the storage account. And if I drill into this, I can actually see it's loading. Come on. The portal is still loading. I'm getting the ring of death in both. Okay, so here we go. So now this is a blob storage account, and you can see that I've got a container. Containers, you think of it as a folder. So it's called Azure, web job hosts. And then in that container, I can create folders. It's like it looks and behaves kind of like a file system. So in here, if I uploaded a file to this particular container, and if I go into here and just to show you what this looks like, if I hit copy URL and then go to Notepad, paste it in here, and I'll show you what that looks like. This is actually the location. So this is actually the storage accounts. This is the part that's uniquely named, are globally unique in a particular, within Azure. So when you create a storage account, and it has to have a unique name, so that constitutes the host name, and it'll be blob.core.windows.net. And then you can see this is the location of that. This is the container, and then I have a folder structure, locks, and OneStream tests, and the actual file is called hosts. So so that's actually the physical location of this file. It looks like just a URL, but this storage account, like I said, could contain VHDs or any type of file.
Yeah.
So in here, I can also see the there's a couple columns in here. It says access tier and access tier last modified. So this is actually another cool thing about storage accounts, is that, and this for some reason is taking, you can see the same view I showed in the tool in the portal. I'm not really sure why it's taking a little bit of time to load here.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go to another storage account here, my Skynet. This is actually also a general purpose. So I'm looking for one that's actually a version 2 storage account. There we go. This one is. So there's so we have a newer storage accounts that were created in the past couple of years. Have this this storage account of V2, and they're functionally the same. You can see it's still standard storage accounts. The performance is the same. This is local redundant storage. You can convert the V1s to V2s, and there's just some some nuances with maybe how you access these accounts, because there's some additional features. So that's why we didn't do it, to be able to provide backward compatibility anyone using like with code against a V1 storage account. But what V2 storage accounts allow you to do is something that we call lifecycle management. So what this means is, so when you put data in a storage account, it's in a tier that we call hot. What that means is that when that we charge you very little to access that data, to be able to put new data in it or get data out of it. But there's a tier that we have called cool storage. And what that is that it's still the same performance as hot storage, so the same throughput, same bandwidth, but we charge you a little bit more to be able to retrieve that data or put data into that tier. So the benefit to customers is that if they want to, maybe they have a bunch of data that their website's generating, and they want to, or they have a pile of data that they want. I just talked to earlier today, a customer doing simulations of power plants, and they want to be able to they have these multi-gigabyte files, tens of gigabytes that they want to store in perpetuity or for long periods of time. So what they can do is put them into a Blob storage account, really inexpensive place to land them, and then as time goes on, they can move them into cool storage, which is even less expensive, and then maybe at a later date move them into what's called archive storage, which is literally on tapes. So a cool feature about a storage account is that you can actually control that automatically. So instead of you having to go in there and say, okay, these files are 90 days old, I'm going to move them into cool storage, you can have the storage account do that for you. So I could say I want to move it to cool storage after 90 days, put in some arbitrary time. And you can also define a filter to say, okay, I want to move it, everything in this, test container, data folder, move all files that are 90 days old in this particular location into the less expensive storage. So you can have, have the storage account do that for you up to and including, if you look at the options here, it can have it automatically move to archive storage, and I can have it automatically delete the data after a certain period of time. Okay. So you can be totally hands off and just have it
manage it for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's kind of neat. So hot storage and cool storage, really the only difference is the price that you pay from a accessibility standpoint.
Correct. Yeah. So the data at rest price for cool storage is really inexpensive, and then the transaction costs, so the per million transactions. I was just looking this up, and I think it was East US as an example for another customer earlier today, and it was like a $1 per million transactions or 10 million transactions. I can't remember the quantity, some large number of transactions. It was $1 for cool storage, and it was 50 cents for hot storage.
So wait, cool storage is more expensive?
Yes, cool storage is more expensive to access. It's cheaper to let it sit.
Okay.
So that's where the benefit comes into play.
Okay, I get it.
Yeah. So, and then the final thing on here too, if you look, there's an option to delete snapshots. So, like if you had a Hyper-V environment, you want to snapshot a disk for backup purposes. We also support that with blobs in Azure, so you can actually make a snapshot of a blob and actually have binary change set of the state of affairs of that particular blob, and you can have this lifecycle management purge those after a certain amount of time, because like everything else in Azure, the snapshot itself is a file, and it's going to take up space, it has a cost. So if you have an automated process doing this, you can actually have it clean it up.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yep. So you can see on here, some of the other things we talked about, tables and queues. I won't really dive much into that just for the sake of simplicity, but this is also where you can explore and see the data that's stored in a storage account. One interesting thing that if you have a VM in Azure and you enable diagnostics to be able to capture performance counters or be able to show CPU usage, network usage, that data is actually stored in a table storage account. So you can explore that. If you have a storage account that you have wired up to a VM, you can actually kind of see how that unstructured data is stored. So also in here is where you create file shares. And we talked a little bit about this. You can create up to, I think it's 100 terabytes now for a file share. And this is that serverless share that you can create. And I happen to have one here called test share. And like the Blob accounts, you can also do or have snapshots with Azure files, and we also can support backup of this data. So you can have a completely serverless configuration to be able to share to put data into. I have customers use this a lot for like log files or maybe tools that they want to mount on a whole bunch of machines. It's not going to be maybe as it's not super high performant. We have a premium storage account that actually has some higher performance levels for Azure files for shares that you create here, but it's certainly useful and practical for things like log files and that sort of thing. So in here, if I hit connect, it'll actually give me the command that I would use to actually mount this using a net use command or from a
yeah, I've done it. It's pretty neat. I mean, it's just a file share.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, super easy to use. Like I said, it supports CIFS, so you can do it from Linux. And we even have the ability to plumb this into, if a customer is using Azure Active AD Directory Services, which is a serverless Active Directory infrastructure, you can actually plumb a serverless file share to a serverless directory environment and actually apply NFS or NTFS ACLs and so forth to files in here too.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah. So those are kind of the basics and blocking and tackling of storage. And I was going to show one cool feature for so this is kind of building on top of Azure Files. And the cool thing about this is it doesn't have a cost other than the Azure File Service. And what this is called is Azure File Sync. So what this entails is the golden copy of your data being stored in a Azure file share. So like I said, up to 100 terabytes per file share. And then let's picture like what's shown here. We have a bunch of branch offices or maybe even these machines might be in other regions of Azure, and they could be, doesn't matter where these machines are. The requirement is it has to be a Windows server, and you put this agent on it, a Windows Azure File Sync agent, and we don't charge by the number of machines that are connecting or anything. So it's so you can have basically, I don't think there's a limit to the number of agents that you can actually connect to the file share. And the way it works is, let's say you have a 50 terabytes of data in a file share, and this server, this branch office server, has a terabyte drive, but you only want to dedicate 500 gigabytes of that drive to be able to have locally accessible data for users to be able to get. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit here just so you can see some of the files for examples. So the entire metadata, so all of the data, the fact that folder structures and files exist is actually downloaded to this machine, but it only physically downloads files of the most frequently accessed data. So kind of as like a distributed file system of sorts. So it'll replicate up any changes you make locally back up to the cloud, and any other machines connected to that same file share would get those changes. It's got some collision handling. So if this machine's on a slower link and you change a file over here at the same time, it won't overwrite changes. It'll create another file to be able to make sure you don't that both of the versions aren't lost. So it has some pretty slick capabilities. You can also do things like throttling bandwidth. So maybe this is a physical server at a physical branch office. You don't want it to suck the life out of the bandwidth that you have there. You can actually set up the agent when you install it to only use a certain amount of bandwidth, a certain amount of disk storage. So it's a really interesting, innovative way to be able to spread data out across a number of regions or a bunch of locations, and not have to have all of your data sitting physically where the servers are. And the cool thing about it, like I said, is that it's free outside of the cost of the Azure File Share Service.
Yeah, that's pretty neat.
Yeah. So those are some pretty cool out of the box features of Azure. And then we have another thing, just as one final parting thought, that is pretty new. I don't actually have one of these running, which is why I'm resorting to the website. But if you have a need for NFS mount points that are really high performance, or SMB mount points that are high performance, what we have are literal NetApp ONTAP appliances sitting in our Azure data centers, and this is ridiculously easy to provision. So instead of having to rack and stack, NetApp appliances yourself in your own data center, if you've got a bunch of servers sitting in the cloud, and you need to give them a really high performance SMB share, you can actually create, hundreds of terabytes of space in at a, I think it goes up to I want to say like 4.5 gigabits a second or something like that of throughput. So it's really pretty high IOP storage that you can actually use to be able to have number of nodes hitting it. And I have a high performance compute customer looking at using this for things like they have hundreds of servers that need an NFS mount point. This is a really quick and dirty way to be able to support those types of scenarios.
Yeah, that's pretty neat.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so that's it for files, kind of the basic things you can do with it, and there's certainly some other things you can see on the options, wiring up custom DNS names and so forth. But I just want to kind of highlight the basics of what it is, what you can do with it, and why it's important to Azure.
Yeah, does my audio sound better now?
Yeah, your audio sounds great.
Oh, okay, good, because I'm back. I splashed down a few minutes ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
Should sound better.
Yeah.
Should sound better.
I that's funny. I didn't hear any of the the commencement to land or any of the call outs.
I muted. I was muted.
Oh, okay. All right, cool.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, man, thank you so much for doing this for us. We'll have to come up with another great topic and do this again soon, because there's a lot of demand for this Azure stuff. So it's great, that you're willing to help everybody learn about this.
Sure, absolutely. Hopefully, made it easy and comprehensible for everyone.
Yep. All right, guys. There you have it. That's your taste of Premier.